warmer, it gets colder, it gets warmer. God is still up there, and I think that will continue in the future. And I thank the chair, and I use the balance of my time.
Senator from Vermont.
I have talked for a long time on this issue, so I don't want to make a great speech here and continue speaking at great length. I do want to say a few things. First of all, I want to thank Senator Inhofe for his kind words. Let me respond in the same way. He and I philosophically and politically come from very, very different places. I have never doubted for one moment the honesty or the sincerity from the senator for Oklahoma. He is saying what he believes. He has the courage to get up here and say it, and I appreciate that. So we are good friends, and I hope we will continue to be good friends. And I think, frankly, it does this Senate and it does this country good when people hear very differences of opinion on an issue that I consider to be of enormous consequence. So what I would say to my friend, I hope, in fact, this is the beginning of a resurgence of discussion about this issue. And I look forward to engaging in that discussion with my friend from Oklahoma. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. And the Senate in a quorum call will be taking up a nomination for the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. That's in Oklahoma. They'll be considering the nomination of Robert Baccarat, and that's supposed to start any time now. At 5:30, a cloture vote on the nomination. If cloture is invoked, the Senate will stay on that nomination until a final confirmation vote occurs. And if no cloture, the Senate could return to consideration of a cybersecurity bill. A little bit of news from the Associated Press. The U.S. Postal Service is facing a first-ever default on billions of dollars in payments that are due to the U.S. Treasury. The Senate passed an $11 billion bill in April to help the post office avoid default, but the bill also postponed cuts that were planned by the Postal Service for another year or two, and the House remains stalled over a measure that includes the aggressive cuts that the Postal Service prefers. It's unlikely that measure will move forward this year. The House in for a brief pro forma session today. They're going to be taking up legislative work tomorrow when they're in at 2 p.m. with votes tomorrow in the House at 6:30.
Mr. President,
Member from Minnesota.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection, so ordered. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination. Robert E. Baccarat of Oklahoma to be United States Circuit Judge.
Under the previous order, there will be 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled in the usual form.
Mr. President, I request that all time in the quorum be equally divided.
Without objection, so ordered.
I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Sturkaka.
send the Senate in to take up the nomination of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, that's Robert Bacharach, for Oklahoma. And there is some question about this nomination. Majority Leader Reid mentioned it earlier. It's customary for judicial nominations to be blocked this close to a potential change of party in the White House with elections coming up. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said he would block it. But in the case of Judge Bacharach, both of Oklahoma's senators support his nomination. Again, a vote on that nomination expected at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And also just to let you know, the House was in for a brief pro forma session today. They'll be in to take up legislative work tomorrow at 2 p.m. Mr. Hofander. And taking a look here on the floor of the Senate, going to take up a nomination for the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Oklahoma. They're going to be considering the nomination of Robert Bacharach at supposed to be starting at 4:30 Eastern, and we should see that shortly. At 5:30, a cloture vote on the nomination. And a little bit of information about this nomination. Majority Leader Reid talking about it earlier, that it's customary for some nominations to be blocked this close to a potential change of party in the White House. And Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said he would block this nomination. But in the case of this judge, Judge Bacharach, both of Oklahoma's senators support his nomination, and it could have effects for Maine as well. Maine's senators have a nominee that they hope will be considered before the elections. Taking a look at our primetime schedule tonight here on C-SPAN 2, we're going to take a look at drug abuse, sexual assaults, and juvenile crime among tribal communities, and that'll start at 8:30. And then the week ahead for Congress and what needs to be accomplished before the House and Senate take their August recess. And after that, remarks from Kate Obenshain, the Young America's Foundation Vice President, on women's support in Campaign 2012. All of that coming up tonight here on C-SPAN 2.
President,
Senator from Iowa.
I ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended.
Without objection, so ordered.
No. For the last few weeks, it's been routine practice here in the Senate that we vote on consensus district court nominees most Mondays. We've done so quite a number of times this Congress, and we could have done so again tonight. Instead, the majority leader has decided to pursue another course. Rather than confirm what would have been the 155th judge tonight, the majority will instead engage in political activity. Make no mistake, it's pure and simple a political posturing situation, and it's really unfortunate. It is well known that the practice and tradition of the Senate is to stop confirming circuit nominees in the closing months of a presidential election year. That is what we have done during the last number of presidential election years. I think that started in 1980, I believe. So that would be 32 years. In fact, today is July 30th. If you go back that number of years to find a presidential election year when we approved a circuit court judge this late. Of course, the rationale has been that this close to an election, whoever wins that election should be the one to pick these lifetime nominees who will run our judiciary system. Now, it is true that there were some votes in relation to circuit nominations in July during the last 2 election years. The only problem, of course, is that those were cloture votes on outstanding nominees the Democrats were filibustering. For example, in July 2004, remember that's a presidential election year, cloture votes were held on 4 outstanding circuit nominees the Democrats were filibustering. Those included Estrada, nominated to the D.C. Circuit, Richard Griffin, nominated to the Circuit Court, David McCaig, nominated to the Sixth Circuit, and Harold Syed, also nominated to the Sixth Circuit. I would note that at the time, the Sixth Circuit alone had a 25% vacancy rate, and every one of those vacancies were designated as judicial emergencies. That, of course, didn't matter to the other side, despite the fact that the Sixth Circuit was in dire straits. The other side filibustered every one of those nominees. I don't recall too much concern from my friends on the other side of the aisle about the need to confirm those judges. even considering the fact that they were judicial emergencies. And now, when our side seeks to enforce the rule, the other side helps create and perfect all we hear are complaints. So, Mr. President, if ever there was an example of crocodile tears, this is it. In 2008, the other side was at it again. Once again, they closed up shop on circuit nominations in June. This time it was the Fourth Circuit that was in dire straits, despite the fact that the Fourth Circuit had a 25% vacancy. The Democrats refused to even process 4 outstanding consensus nominees. Those nominees included Judge Robert Conrad, even though he had been already confirmed unanimously as a U.S. attorney and also as a district court judge. Democrats refused to process Judge Glenn Conrad, even though he had strong bipartisan home state support. Steve Matthews also had strong home state support, yet the Democrats in the committee refused to even give him a vote. To show you the incredible lengths that the Democrats were willing to go, they even tried to justify blocking the nomination of U.S. Attorney Rod Rosenstein to the Fourth Circuit by claiming that he was doing such a great job as U.S. Attorney that it would be wrong to promote him to a judgeship. By refusing to give these nominees a vote in committee, the Democrats engaged in what amounted to a pocket filibuster of all 4 of these candidates for the Fourth Circuit. And again, this was at a time when the Fourth Circuit vacancy rate was over 25%, similar to the Sixth Circuit vacancy rate that I just talked about in the previous presidential election year of 2004. But that didn't matter to the other side. In 2008, just like in 2004, they simply refused to process any more circuit nominees after June. At the end of the day, based on any fair and objective metric, the suggestion that we today are operating any differently than the Democrats did in 2004 and 2008 is simply without merit. Democrats stalled and blocked numerous highly qualified circuit nominees during those presidential election years, including even nominees with bipartisan support. The Democratic leadership has invoked repeatedly what has been called the Thurman Rule to justify stalling nominees, even those with bipartisan support. And now they don't want us to play by the same set of rules. The Democratic leadership doesn't want us to enforce the rule that they helped establish. So let me quote from a CRS report, Congressional Research Service report on this subject. Quote, "The senator who most frequently has asserted the existence of a Thurman Rule has been the current chairman of the Judiciary Committee," end of quote. The CRS report noted that on March the 7th, 2008, the chairman recalled, quote, "When President Reagan was running for president and Senator Thurman, then in the Republican minority, as ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, instituted a policy to stall President Carter's nominations. That policy, known as the Thurman Rule, was put in when the Republicans were in the minority. It is a rule that we will still follow and that it will take effect very soon." End of quote. The "we" there, meaning if it is a rule that we and the Democrat majority still follow. Again, this was in March of that presidential election year, not June or July. So that rule was very carefully laid out, March the 7th, 2008, that they didn't intend to approve any nominees after that point. CRS went on to note the strong support of the majority leader has expressed for the so-called Thurman Rule. According to CRS, quote, "Senator Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, has expressed agreement with Senator Leahy about the existence of a Thurman Rule. In April 10, 2008, floor remarks, Senator Reid said, quote, "In a presidential election year, it is always very tough for judges. That is the way it has been for a long time, and that is why we have the Thurman Rule and other such rules," end of quote. That "we" once again refers to why we, the Democrats, have the Thurman Rule. 5 days later, the majority leader said, quote, "You know, there is a Thurman doctrine that says after June we will have to take a real close look at judges in a presidential election year," end of quote. These quotes indicate not only the expectation, but in fact a support for slowing down and cutting off the confirmation of judges in a presidential election year. Senate Republicans are invoking this practice in a more narrow fashion and after more confirmations than Democrats did in the past. Setting aside the so-called Leahy-Thurman Rule by any objective measure, this president has been treated fairly and consistent with past Senate practices. For example, with regard to the total number of confirmations, this president is well ahead of his predecessor, President Bush. We have confirmed 154 of this president's district and circuit nominations. We have also confirmed 2 Supreme Court nominations during President Obama's first term. When Supreme Court nominations are pending in the committee, all other nominations, work on nominations is put on hold. The last time the Senate confirmed 2 Supreme Court nominees was during President Bush's second term, and during that term the Senate confirmed a total of only 119 district and circuit court nominees. So let me put it yet another way. Under similar circumstances, we have confirmed 35 more district and circuit nominees for President Obama than we did for President Bush. So you can understand why we get a little bit irritated on this side of the aisle when we keep being pushed by the other side that somehow we are not treating this administration as fairly as they treated President Bush, or just doing the job and doing it in the same way. During the last presidential election, 2008, the Senate confirmed a total of 28 judges, 24 district and 4 circuit. This presidential election, we have already exceeded those numbers, having confirmed a total of 32 judges. So those who say that this president is being treated differently either fail to recognize history or want to ignore the facts, or both. While this president has not been treated differently than previous presidents, he certainly has behaved differently with regard to nominations. He has been slow to send nominees to the floor, and he abuses his recess appointment authority. If President Obama has gotten as many confirmations as he could have, it is because if President Obama hasn't gotten as many confirmations as he could have, it is because he has been slow in nominating and he has abused his recess appointment power. Let me take just a moment to discuss how slow the president has been with his nominations. When President Obama took office, there were 59 judicial vacancies. 1 year later, at the beginning of 2008, there were only 43 vacancies. So during the last year of President Bush's second term, when the Democrats controlled the Senate, and during a time when they refused to process 4 nominees for the 4th Circuit, they allowed the vacancy rate to increase by more than 37%. By mid-March 2009, when the first Obama judicial nominations were sent to the Senate, there were 70 judicial vacancies. Over the next 3 months, only 5 more circuit nominations were sent to the Senate. By the end of June, when the Senate received its first district nomination, there were 80 vacancies accumulated by that time. The failure or delay in submitting nominations for vacancies has been the practice of this administration, and it still continues to this day. By the end of 2009, there were 100 vacancies. with only 20 nominees. In December 2010, more than half of the 108 vacancies had no nominees. At the beginning of this year, only 36 nominees were pending for 82 vacancies. And it continues to this day that more than half of the 76 vacancies have no nominees. I just want to remind my colleagues that all of this begins with the White House. So if someone wants to complain about judicial vacancies, they should mail those complaints to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Or another way to put it, the Senate cannot act on nominees that aren't sent up here from the White House for us to act upon. Now, I also mentioned that the President could have had a few more district court nominees at the end of the last Congress. Our side offered to confirm quite a number of district nominees who were on the executive calendar if, and that's a big if, the President would provide his assurances that he wouldn't bypass the Senate with recess appointments. The President refused to provide those assurances, and we found out why a couple of weeks later when the President unconstitutionally bypassed the Senate. I want everyone to understand this phenomenon. At the end of last Congress, we offered to confirm quite a few district court nominees, but the President wouldn't say yes for an answer. Rather than choosing a path that led to more progress and greater number of confirmations, the President chose the path to more confrontation and fewer nominations. The same thing happened last week. Once again, our side offered to confirm an additional district court nominee. But once again, the other side refused to take yes for an answer. Rather than choosing the path that led to cooperation and additional confirmations, the other side chose more confrontation and fewer confirmations. The other side chose confrontation and fewer nominations. They would rather waste precious time on a vote to nowhere than spend the little time we have left on getting more nominations done. So here we are again, engaged in this political theater. So I'm here to urge my colleagues to vote no on cloture and uphold the Leahy-Thurman rule. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
And the Senate taking up the nomination of Robert Bacharach for the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Oklahoma. Senator Grassley of Iowa was just on the floor. He's talking about the Thurmond-Leahy rule. It's a custom in the Senate of blocking judicial nominations close to a potential change of party in the White House ahead of the elections. And let you know, in prime time tonight here on C-SPAN 2, we'll look at drug abuse, sexual assaults, and juvenile crime among tribal communities starting at 8:30. Then the week ahead for Congress and what needs to be accomplished before the House and Senate take their August recess. And after that, remarks from Kate Obenshain, the Young America's Foundation Vice President on Women's Support in Campaign 2012. And that's all tonight here on C-SPAN 2. We are expecting a cloture vote on the nomination of Robert Bacharach for the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and that's expected to be taken up at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Mr. President,
Senator from Kentucky.
I ask consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Well, Mr. President, it's almost August. We're just a few weeks away from the political parties' nominating conventions. At this point in past presidential election years, the Senate is diligently working on things like appropriation bills or the defense authorization bill, but not this year in the Senate. Our Democratic colleagues refuse to do the basic work of government. Even though Chairman Inouye has said he would like to pass some of the 9 appropriation bills his committee has worked hard to complete, we haven't taken up a single one. Our Democratic colleagues won't bring the defense authorization bill to the floor either, even though both the chairman and the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee are ready to work on this important legislation as well. And they refuse to work with us to help the economy or to prevent a looming tax hike on nearly 1 million small businesses at the end of the year. Instead, they prefer to waste valuable time on a vote they have argued for many years shouldn't take place this close to a presidential election. Now that there's a Democrat in the White House, they refuse to follow past practice of postponing the consideration of circuit court nominations this late in a presidential election year so the American people can decide who they want to make these important appointments. This practice is known as the Leahy-Thurman rule. It's a custom they vigorously defended when there was a Republican in the White House. So let's take a look at recent history. In 2004, the unemployment rate was only 5.4%. On our circuit courts, however, back in 2004, there were 9 declared judicial emergencies. Now, that didn't matter to our Democratic colleagues. The Senate stopped circuit court nominations in June of that year, even though we had 9 judicial emergencies. In 2008, the unemployment rate was much higher at 6.1%. On our circuit courts, there were almost as many judicial emergencies. But on the Fourth Circuit, things were much, much worse. Fully 1/4 of the seats were empty, even though there were qualified nominees to fill them. Our Democrat colleagues didn't care either. In the name of Senate custom and practice, by which I mean the Leahy-Thurman rule, they pocket filibustered several outstanding circuit court nominees in committee. Now, it didn't matter to our Democratic friends that these nominees enjoyed strong home state support, including bipartisan home state support, or that they had outstanding credentials, or that they would fill declared emergencies on those circuit courts. The Senate couldn't process them. They told us again and again and again, because it was June, and that was, to quote the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, way past the time of the Leahy-Thurman rule. Today, as August, not June, but August, is upon us, the country's unemployment rate is unfortunately much higher than it was in either 2004 or 2008. It's now at 8.2%. But the situation on our circuit courts is much better than it was in either 2004 or 2008. There are now fewer judicial emergencies. And in terms of what the Senate can do about it, as opposed to the President's failure to nominate people, we have confirmed every nominee whom the President has submitted to fill a judicial emergency, save one. Only one. That's right. The Senate has confirmed every nominee he has sent up to fill an emergency on our circuit courts, save one, and that one nominee isn't on the Senate floor. In fact, the Senate has already confirmed as many or more circuit court nominees this year than it did in 2004 or 2008. It has confirmed a much higher percentage of circuit court nominations. And it has confirmed these nominations faster than during the Bush administration. On the last point, although you won't hear our Democratic friends acknowledge it, the average time from nomination to confirmation, of a circuit court nominee for President Obama is over a month faster than it was for President Bush in his first term. The time from nomination to confirmation for President Obama is over a month faster than in President Bush's first term. And it is over 100 days faster than it was for President Bush's circuit court nominees overall. So the situation with our economy is worse now than it was in 2004 or 2008, while the situation on our circuit courts is better. The economy is worse, but the situation on circuit courts is better. So what do you think our Democratic colleagues are going to focus on? Are they going to do the basic work of government? Fund the government, for example? Doesn't look like it. Are they going to reauthorize important programs for our nation's defense? I'm told it's been 50-some-odd years since the defense authorization bill hadn't passed. No sign of it this year. Are they going to work with us to fix the economy or prevent a looming tax hike? Don't see any evidence of it yet. What they want to do instead is violate the custom in presidential election years that the Congressional Research Service says they have been the biggest proponents of. This is not me saying this. This is the Congressional Research Service. They want to violate the custom in presidential election years that the CRS says they have been the biggest proponents of. The CRS does not say that the biggest proponent of the Leahy-Thurman rule is me or Ranking Member Grassley or even Senator Thurman. Rather, the CRS says that the most frequent proponent of the rule, quote, is the current chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Now, no doubt we'll hear some post hoc gerrymandered rationale from our Democratic friends as to why the rule the CRS says they have been the biggest proponents of somehow doesn't apply to them. They'll ignore the pocket filibusters of people who would have filled judicial emergencies during a Republican administration. But, of course, that's par for the course. Par for the course. Whether it's pro forma sessions to prevent recess appointments or judicial filibusters or the Leahy-Thurman rule, our friends don't want the practices they have pioneered. They don't want the practices that they have pioneered or been the biggest proponents of to apply to them. They don't want the practices that they've been the pioneers of and the biggest proponents of to apply to them. Now, it's pretty convenient for them, but that's not the way the Senate is supposed to work. In sum, on the subject of the Leahy-Thurman rule, we have been more responsible in deciding to invoke it in this year than our Democratic colleagues were in either 2004 or 2008. I would urge my friends to oppose this double standard and to oppose cloture. And let me repeat, this is not about the individual who has been nominated. It wasn't, in many respects, about the individuals to be nominated in 2004 or 2008. What this is a bipartisan timeout bipartisan in the sense it's been used by both sides, timeout within, and this year, 6 months of an election. In '08, it was within 8 months of an election, or 8 months of the end of a term. Within 6 months of an election, to these important lifetime jobs, to see who the next president may be. And so, yes, I yield to my friend from Oklahoma.
Yeah, first of all, let me just say that it's awkward that one of the best nominees, Robert Bacharach, is the one that's subject to this thing, and I regret that that's the case. The problem that you have is that this would be the latest confirmation of a circuit court nominee during an election year in 20 years. And I was thinking just today that I cannot vote against this guy, but I sure can just vote president. If we have a 20-year precedent that was put in there by the Democrats and the Republicans alike, I really wouldn't want to be the one to break that precedent. We're within 4 months of an election right now. I think it's very important that we do what we've done over the last 20 years and allow the new administration to come in. This Bacharach, by the way, he's been up there for 2 years before any action, and I think you have to be a little suspicious as to why is it coming up right now. So I just may end up voting president on this.
Well, I thank my friend from Oklahoma. He confirms that this is not about the nominee, who apparently is well qualified. This is about an approach that's developed called the Leahy-Thurman Rule over several decades, under which has been the practice to kind of call a timeout within rather close proximity to the election. In 2008, the timeout was called in June. We are going to enter August at the end of this week. I would say also to my friend from Oklahoma, we have confirmed for the president in this election year 6 circuit court nominees. President Bush in 2008 got 4. President Bush in 2004 got 5. We have not been unfair to the administration, and it's certainly no reflection on what is apparently an outstanding nominee from your state. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I hope the American people are witnessing this moment in the United States Senate. We are about to make history here. We're going to make history here in just a few minutes when we have a roll call vote on U.S. Magistrate Judge Robert Bacharach to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. This fine man who has been nominated to this high position in the federal judiciary has the support of both of the senators of his home state. They are both Republicans. Listen to what Senator Tom Coburn said of Mr. Bacharach, Magistrate Bacharach, a stellar candidate. Listen to what Senator Inhofe said about the same nominee from his state, a great guy. I listened to these comments, and then I reflect on the fact this man was reported out of the Senate Judiciary Committee on a voice vote. There was so little controversy because of his outstanding record, he was reported out on a voice vote. And the Democratic Majority Leader has offered to bring to the floor of the Senate a nominee approved by both Republican senators from Oklahoma, and now you hear Senator McConnell come to the floor and explain why the Republicans will have to filibuster and stop this man from being appointed to the court. Is it something about him? No. It's all about politics, and it's all about the presidential campaign. If the Republicans sustain this filibuster and stop this good man from his service on the circuit court, it will be the first time in the history of the United States Senate that an appeals court nominee with bipartisan committee support has ever been filibustered on the floor of the Senate. But how can we be surprised? This will be the 86th Republican filibuster. It is said that if the only tool you own is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. If you happen to be a Republican leader in the Senate, every day looks like another chance for a filibuster. 86 filibusters. Now they're filibustering judicial nominees unanimously approved by the committee and approved by both Republican senators. The President is prepared to sign this man into this position, a critically important position in the judiciary, And who is stopping him? The Republicans in the Senate. No surprise, the 86th Republican Senate filibuster in this Congress. No surprise that it comes from Senator McConnell, who very openly and candidly, and I assume honestly said, my biggest job in the Senate is to make sure Barack Obama is a one-term president. That's how he welcomed President Obama to the White House. And so they piled filibuster on top of filibuster to stop the rare possibility that this president would give this good man, this exceptional man, I should say, this exceptional man a chance to serve his country. Listen to the background of this man who's about to become a victim of the 86th Republican filibuster. 13 years he served. He's handled an impressive caseload, including almost 3,000 civil and criminal matters and 400 judicial settlement conferences. He is the type of consensus nominee that we look for in every single state. He's given the highest possible rating by the American Bar Association. No questions asked. This is a good man and a good candidate for this spot. The American Bar Association's nonpartisan peer review, every single reviewer said this magistrate is well qualified to serve as a circuit court judge in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And where are the politics here? The politics are that the Democratic Majority Leader has offered to the 2 Republican senators from Oklahoma a chance for this good man to serve, and now they are going to stop him with a Republican filibuster. If you wonder if you're looking for evidence of a dysfunctional Senate, hold on tight. In just a few minutes, we'll start a roll call, and you'll watch as Republican after Republican comes and votes to kill this man's nomination for the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. President Obama will be the first president in 20 years to complete his first term with more judicial vacancies than when he took office. They have dragged their feet every step of the way with filibusters and delays to stop this president from appointing the judges he was elected to appoint. And good people like U.S. Magistrate Judge Robert Bacharach, who submit their names in this process, who go through extensive background investigations, who put their lives on hold just wondering if they are going to make it, get caught in a political game that's being played here on the floor. I just hope there's a handful, 5, 6, or 7 Republican senators who will give this man a fair break, will give him a chance to serve his country as the circuit judge for the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Please, let us not make history today by stopping a highly qualified, bipartisan nominee, well qualified by the American Bar Association, from serving this circuit. The senators, the Republican senators from Oklahoma, were right. He's a stellar candidate and by every measure a great guy. Please don't make him a victim of last-minute political campaigning in this last week before the recess that we take for our Democratic National Convention and Republican National Convention. He shouldn't be a victim of this presidential campaign. He deserves a chance to serve. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President,